Thanks, everyone. So it sounds like you've been doing some really interesting things the last few days and taking some of these ideas in different directions. I guess I don't know exactly what you've been doing, so some of the things I say might align with things you've already done, you've already heard, and some of them might not. What I'm going to talk about really is about people's behaviour, so people's actions and how those are kind of thought about in design, and particularly with reference to futures and how and kind of considerations of the future. And I think because it's something that actually is quite central to a lot of the sort of ideas that people come up with, and a lot of speculation involves something about people and around people's actions and what we almost assume they will be like in the future compared to now, and what kind of motivations are involved. And this is kind of critical. I mean, I've been on both sides of this, trying to do it from the point of view of actually trying to sort of design to change people's behaviour, and also on the other side thinking actually that's not necessarily the right thing to be doing. So I've kind of got a bit of a schizophrenic approach to it in a way. But I just like I said, until last week I worked at the RCA, and then next month I'm going to Carnegie Mellon to be assistant professor in design in the design school. But this area of this kind of topic of like design for behaviour change, which is what it's become known as in recent years, it currently kind of encompasses everything from stuff like kind of quantified self and sort of self-tracking things to systems that in some way, alert you like this, like alerting people about, in this case, taking pills on time, but also alerting people's families about whether they've done it and kind of establishing patterns of use in that way. To things that are about tracking your own use of stuff, like in this case, is energy use and these kind of things. So there's this big area of kind of design that in some way is trying to change people's behaviour, trying to change the way people do things through various methods. Sometimes it's giving people feedback, sometimes it's persuading them in other ways, sometimes it's forcing them, sometimes it's tricking them, lots of these kind of things. And you see examples in public space as well. I mean, a lot of architecture is involved, but things like this at Euston Station, to try to encourage people to stand on the right-hand side and walk on the left. You see these small kind of interventions, in a sense, in public space that are about design that's trying to influence people. But we can think about it at a kind of system level as well. Things like, car sharing schemes or Zipcar, that in a sense is designed for behaviour change, but it's at a different scale or a different level to something that's about, it requires a kind of system level change. Some of my students' projects in recent years have been things that are focusing on particular areas of this. So this, for example, Nazli here, her research is around trying to get people to repair things. So behaviour change around repair, but she's trying to do it in a way that's about making repair really visible, so it's more emotionally engaging because you know that this thing's being repaired in a particular way. So these kind of different approaches. This is Uni, another student project. She's looking at trying to get people to refill packaging by making it emotionally engaging in some way. So it's this kind of, can you design things in a sense that appeal to people in different ways, or that influence people's behaviour. But there is this, in parallel with all of these kind of design approaches, there's basically governments. So governments have become very interested in changing public behaviour. And you could argue they've always been interested in changing public behaviour. That's sort of what governments do. But in recent years, influence from kind of behavioural economics has kind of captured various aspects of the civil service in a way. So we have things like the Behavioural Insights team in the UK, which is mostly economists, although they employ some designers, but they're mostly designers as kind of execute the vision of the economists rather than actually doing sort of coming up with the concept in the first place. And there's a similar team in the US, and even the World Bank has started to get into this area of kind of people's behaviour as a thing to address. And in the UK, the outcomes of this Behavioural Insights team, the design outcomes have often been quite minor things. So they're, for example, this is what you see now if you basically do anything on the gov.uk website. If you submit your details, it reminds you that you should, or ask you, please join the NHS organ donor register. If you needed an organ transplant, would you have one? If so, please help others. So you can see there's a kind of persuasive intent embedded in it. That particular line was tested against dozens of others. So they did enormous trials, varying it slightly to see which message was most persuasive in terms of getting people actually to click through. So this is kind of A/B testing of these kind of things, which is actually happening on a reasonable scale now, and it's possible to do it digitally in a way that was very difficult with physical products to kind of test to this extent the effect of small design changes. But of course, in a sense, all design and technology in general is in some way about people's behaviour in some way. It's about people's actions. Right? Everything that's designed encodes some kind of hypothesis about human behaviour, what people are like, what they'll do, what people prefer, how people act, how they'll act in a group, individually, and these kind of things. And if you look at big projects like things like Crossrail, it's happening in London, every aspect of that project, from the design of the exterior of the trains, the interior of them, the colour scheme, the way it's laid out, the way the seating's arranged, everything, to the way the maps are designed and how stations are positioned on the map to try to make it look like these two are closer, these two are further apart. To the digital side of it as well, the apps and so on, I'll go with it. Every aspect of a big project like that has some hypotheses about human behaviour kind of embedded in it. Right? Everything is driven by assumptions about people will do this, people are more likely to do this than this. And a lot of it's backed up by big quantitative sort of data studies around passenger movements or these kind of things. But it's interesting to think that it's always there. Design is always in some way trying to influence what people do. So we could say, in fact, all design influences our behaviour, whether it's intentional or not. But there are lots of examples you come across of things that have been designed to try to influence people's behaviour deliberately. And often when we come across them, they're often quite negative, right? So even though it might be intended to be for some kind of social benefit, so, I don't know, reducing crime or reducing people's impact on the environment or helping people be healthier and so on, they often got quite a negative approach. So, in a sense, this is designed for behaviour change, right? Spikes on a wall or, broken glass embedded on a wall is designed against crime, as Central St Martin's would put it. So's this. This is the Camden bench that Camden Council commissioned from Factory Design, which is basically a concrete bench that's designed to be too uncomfortable for anyone to sit for very long or to lie down on. So the surface is kind of ridged so that, for example, a homeless person finds it uncomfortable to lie down on it, or anyone finds it uncomfortable to lie down on it. It's got no backrest, so it's you can't sit for too long. This is designed for behaviour change, but it's and it's got a kind of social benefit intent, but it's arguable where the boundary of that benefit is drawn. Like it fulfills the brief of making a bench that's uncomfortable, but actually does that? What are the wider social impact of that? So lots of these kind of things. There are companies that make stick-on plastic spikes for walls to make it uncomfortable to sit on or to walk on. Even things like this. So what do you think that is? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's to slow drivers down. It's a range of fiberglass children of varying ethnicities and uniforms, designed to basically get drivers to slow down. You think there's a child about to walk out on the road, you're not quite sure, you slow down, and so on. Now, whether or not it's effective, it's interesting that it exists, and it's interesting that there's a team of designers designing these, along with giant penguins, and which I think probably would cause drivers to slow down. But it's interesting, this idea that this is the brief here is to get drivers to slow down or to drive differently through some kind of intervention in the environment. And there were, obviously in different countries and different approaches. There have been quite a lot of things tackling this kind of subject. So this was in New Zealand, where this was again around kind of trying to get people to drive safely. So you think, appealing to sort of showing a child as a sort of, kind of a thing to worry about, essentially. And then when it rains, the poster releases this kind of, hopefully, ink. Now, you can argue whether that, as behaviour change, whether that actually is about shocking drivers so much that they, it might actually be more dangerous. And I suspect here the real intention was to get a lot of publicity for the campaign rather than actually the specifics of changing driver behaviour. But you can see these techniques. There's a whole range of these different ways of doing it, which are all about trying to get people to do things or not do things or do things differently. This was another one around driving from 1930s Tennessee, where dangerous drivers or careless drivers were going to be given special license plates with a skull on them, like a black license plate with a skull, to mark them out as bad drivers, so people would kind of take care around them. But you think, like, we laugh at it, but it's almost like there was a reasoning behind that, right? There was a process that a team presumably went through, thinking, okay, this will work. We assume this will work. We assume this about people. I think this is interesting to compare across cultures and across history what's doing. This is a current or recent thing in the UK where a local council, Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, are sending obese residents motivational weight loss text messages. So they decided, there's a problem with obesity, there's a problem with health in the area. They're going to, their design solution was to send people text messages. This is the example messages that they actually gave in the press release. Capital letters, exactly like that, right? So we can laugh at it and we think, well, what were they thinking? Like, how was the thought process is there that this will in some way influence people, this will motivate people, and it may well do, but there's a lot of assumptions bound into this about what people are like and what will influence them and what will motivate them, and who's in the right in the situation. And it completely ignores any kind of wider social factors or sort of societal issues or anything around access to healthy food or anything like that. And then we get to more extreme end, like this is, I don't know, people might have seen this before, but this is a patent that Sony took out for a TV that basically interrupts whatever you're watching with adverts, and listens for you to say the name of the brand to get the advert to go away. So say McDonald's to end the commercial. So the guy on the sofa has to get up and say McDonald's, and then then it's reported that this consumer has engaged with the brand, and then they're able to watch what they were watching again. So you can think, this is designed for behaviour change, but it's a very different end of the sort of scale to something that's about perhaps trying to help people do something more efficiently or more effectively, or so yeah, it's a wide range of things. But we can ask almost what are the assumptions about people in each of those. So all of those things have got something bound up in them around, well, we assume people act like this, or we assume this will motivate people, or this will get people to do one thing rather than another. So I was really interested in this kind of question. So I realised this a few years ago now, but that this kind of aspect of people's behaviour was, like, design was obviously addressing it, but there wasn't that much theory in a way. There was lots of stuff. It was basically all drawn from other disciplines. Lots of different areas of psychology and different areas of social science and cybernetics and so on. And in a way, I think that's good, actually. Initially, I was thinking, well, why hasn't design got a proper kind of way of addressing this? But actually, the more I went on, I actually thought, well, all these other areas, they're all covering different approaches to it. They're all taking different perspectives on human nature. They're all actually different kind of windows onto, like, the human condition in a way. So I tried to bring together some of these insights from these different disciplines through lots of workshops with designers and architects and sort of user experience designers and so on, from lots of different backgrounds. So tried to put them together into a kind of toolkit, which was fashionable at the time, to have a kind of toolkit. Which and I've got some of these here with a set of cards. So what I'd like is just have a pick one at random and just have a look at. So I ended up putting these together into this kind of toolkit, and various people have used it in different contexts. So it's been translated into a couple of different contexts, sometimes using the original examples, and sometimes people have produced their own examples with local kind of content. So in Mexico, for example, there's a project at this UAM, like every year, the design students produce their own version of these design with intent cards. I mean, not the entire pack, but some of them, using local examples of particular patterns or particular approaches, and some new ones as well. So the reason I show you all that is just to show you kind of the breadth of it and some of the things it can be applied to. And a lot of these things end up being used in kind of workshops and this sort of thing with different people from different backgrounds and so on. And like Tobias said, eventually it will be in a book, which hopefully will have a more colourful cover than that. But anyway, so. But to get back to the kind of wider point of this, a lot of when we think about the future or futures, a lot of these visions of the future, particularly when they're kind of quite grand visions rather than these sort of small things, they require or kind of entail people changing their behaviour on a large scale, which I think is interesting because we can see that a lot of these techniques at present don't necessarily work very well. Right, or they work in certain circumstances and not others. Yet, nevertheless, we still seem to construct futures that often involve mass, huge, large-scale behaviour change without really necessarily thinking through some of the implications of that. So you think of traditional examples like, and you've probably seen this loads of times this week, or you probably will, but things like the Garden City movement, where where the idea was to basically have planned cities where nothing will go wrong anymore. There will be no crime, there will be no social deprivation by planning people's lives so closely that actually, these problems wouldn't occur. You would separate the industry from from residential areas, so there wouldn't be any conflict. All these kind of things, everyone would be provided for. So there's this long kind of tradition of sort of large behaviour change projects in a way, and this was how the Garden City movement. This is one of its practical examples, which is Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, which I think still has hasn't fully worked in the sense there's still crime and there's still inequality, but it's interesting to see how some of these things end up being resolved. But of course, this is this idea of being able to plan people's lives effectively on a large scale. And this is sort of the modernist dream in a way. It's almost like if we plan everything perfectly and design everything, there won't be any problems anymore in society. Everything will be planned, everyone will have a role, everything will be designed exactly right. And I mean, and it could be that effectively, crime and disorder go away because it's just not possible anymore, or things are designed out of it. So this is from J.G. Ballard's idea that almost engineering the moral order into people's lives, which is an interesting point. But what often happens, I mean, this is something that I think will become apparent, is that once you decide what the right, well not you, but once one decides what the right behaviour is, in a way, or what the correct way of acting is, everything else becomes effectively defective. Right? So it's almost like if you're, as a designer, you're saying, well, we want people to do this, we want people to be efficient, we want people not to hurt each other, we want people to, use energy efficiently. Effectively, then every other action becomes treated as a defective thing. Those people become treated as, non-compliant, defective, in need of kind of some kind of correction. And I think it's worth noting this. Whenever you're thinking of these kind of visions, or whenever you're looking at some of these speculations, think about almost what are you assuming would be defective in your vision? What is not? What would be wrong? What would be a thing that wouldn't match it? And consider, perhaps question. Yeah.
Can you make that paper available?
Yeah, it is. It is available if you search for it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is online. Yeah. So. This is an example from the south of France that inspired that particular quote from J.G. Ballard. But it's but I think so. One of the points with this in there is that a lot of these kind of approaches to people's behaviour assume this kind of thing, this predictability. It's almost like a determinism, where human action, human behaviour is almost just like a kind of dependent variable. Like if only you design things exactly correctly, people will act in specified ways. And in architecture, this became kind of controversial eventually, probably too late, but in the 60s, people started to realise that actually this is, perhaps not necessarily the most human approach, and actually it's unrealistic as well. And I think at present in Silicon Valley, at present with some of the kind of more extreme quantified self and more extreme kind of fully connected products that track everything you do and kind of quantify it and gamify it, I feel they haven't quite realised this yet, that actually, they're not going to, this idea of determinism is going to be a problem, because it doesn't. First of all, it doesn't really work, and secondly, it causes other issues. It causes other problems. I was at an event a while back where someone very senior in a big engineering company stood up and said, "Look, why can't I have a table where I look up how to get people to do what I want them to do?" So he was involved in doing planning things like hospitals and big kind of railway stations and stuff. And he was just like, why hasn't psychology and social science produced me a guidebook for how to get the public to act in the ways I want? He's like, why can't I have like a specification sheet for humans? I mean, I'm paraphrasing for you. I mean, this is me getting inside his head and like saying other things. But I thought this is really interesting, that it's this assumption that if only we knew everything about humans or human action, or if only psychology somehow got to sociology got to a better stage, we would be able to have this kind of fully predictable model, which is interesting, because one of the issues is, of course, that if we design things as if we have that model, as if we assume that there's a model that's correct, we end up perhaps, if we end up using those systems that assume a particular model of people, we probably end up turning into that model. If everything we use assumes that there's only, we're like, this is what you care about, this is what you care about, then you end up caring about that, perhaps. And I think this is the idea that this Tony Dunn's idea here, that in some sense you become a caricature you become the caricature that the designers expect or the designers assume. I think it's interesting, because particularly when you're thinking about futures, where you're essentially speculating a particular set of contexts that are different to now. Are you producing a sense of caricature which people will end up living in anyway? Which is, is interesting to think about. I mean, this is something one of my students, Delphina, who was using kind of quantified self quite a lot. This was a jawbone up thing in order to understand how it relates to her. How do these kind of quantified self things actually talk to you as a human? She found that the sort of very reductive way in which it invited you to say that you were either dragging or you were pumped up. Those were the two options. I mean, I think there were others, but these two. She said, never am I either of those things, right? If I'm dragging, I'm not going to tell this app that I'm dragging, and if I'm pumped up, I'm not going to be, obsessively recording it. And it's interesting, and I guess as we get this kind of convergence, perhaps, of algorithms and kind of artificial intelligence with some of these assumptive models about human behaviour, we're going to see some interesting and perhaps probably quite annoying developments. So, we get things like this which at present are funny when it seems like algorithms are misunderstanding context or can't possibly understand it. But when they start making decisions around our behaviour or around our actions based on similarly kind of contextless information, then perhaps we start to get some problems. But of course, one of the things with all of this is we can't escape the fact that there's politics in all of this. So, and I'm sure I expect George is probably giving you a better discussion of this than I can. But in a sense, everything that's designed is in some way political, right? Design is almost like, to paraphrase someone else, is almost like politics made tangible in a way, because you're designing something, you're specifying what should happen, what shouldn't happen. That cup is supposed to go in the saucer, right? I could put it upside down, but that's kind of not part of the intended use. So that's a very weak form of politics. But in a way, or anything that's planned that makes some things easier than others, that presents a vision of what should be or what shouldn't be, is a kind of politics. Now, some people would say, okay, well, how do you get around this? How do you do this better? How do you actually kind of and from a sort of perhaps mainstream design approach might be to try to design with people, or to say, okay, well, let's include people better in this behaviour thing. So it's not about doing things to the public, but it's perhaps about involving the public in it. It should be perhaps designing with people rather than for people, and you get things like kind of participatory design and co-design, which try to some extent to understand people's lives better as a kind of precursor or as part of this process of designing. So where there has been participatory design for behaviour change, which has often been things like health-related things where, trying to understand what it is about factors in someone's life that mean that, they don't do much exercise or they eat in a particular way. They've been generally been more successful. Now, they're quite small studies usually, but things that actually involve people rather than just making assumptions about the public. But then does that mean we have to co-design with every single person? Because obviously everyone's different and every context's different. And I think that, it's the scale issue is difficult. And however much we use all these terms, these kind of empathy and nuances of real people's lives and all of these kind of things which are important. I mean, I'm sort of mocking them, but it's important. I mean, it's very, very important to try to do that. However much you try and do that, you're still, it's still only a few people, and it's still only a few people's lives. And it's not, and it's not everything. And you're not trying to understand people from the point of view of trying to be able to change everything in their life. You're perhaps trying to understand the context and the nuances of people's everyday experience, and then try and design with that rather than kind of against it. But then one question would be, well, how do you do it for futures? Because you can't avoid having some kind of models of humans as designers, right? We're always going to have some kind of way of thinking about people, but we can at least kind of challenge and refine them in a way. So what time is it? We've got a few minutes. What I'd like you to do, so I'm just going to give you a somewhat, well, I don't know, it's perhaps not as speculative as some of the other things you've come up with in this, so far, but one of the ways I've been exploring trying to do this sort of thing is by generating brief kind of scenarios that involve behaviour change in some way. Because we've seen that a lot of visions of the future have kind of behaviour change embedded in them, or they make assumptions about public behaviour changing in a particular way. But I think sometimes these kind of things, these kind of fictions can be quite a good way of almost uncovering the assumptions about people that are going into them. So, any of the things you've created already, in fact, you could probably break it down and say, well, okay, what assumptions have you made about people and about how people will act within them? But I'm just going to read out now and give you a little. I think this is a scenario that is almost the convergence of a lot of trends in current kind of behaviour change and design for behaviour change sorts of things, right? So this is intentionally horrible, but this is how it is, right? So, okay. So this is a press release from July 2018, right? And this is called Bestie, your smart advisor. Right? And it's a press release aimed at young people and teenagers from Nesta and the Cabinet Office. So, we're all irrational, right? We're all irrational, and it leads to bad decisions in our everyday lives. You probably make mistakes every day, from choosing unhealthy food to getting distracted from your schoolwork. You can check out, there's some great TED Talks that kind of tell us how, it shows how our thinking leads us astray. We're often kind of deceived by these sort of biases our thinking. And sometimes it can be hard to make up your mind. And sometimes your mind confuses you with too many ideas. Wouldn't you love some kind of app that, a smart advisor that tells you what to do to be better and, optimises your choices for you? Well, now it's here. The smart bods at creative agency Nozzle have hooked up with the Cabinet Office and Nesta to create Bestie. Bestie learns about you and what you're like. It's like your digital best friend who helps you get the most out of life and helps you make better decisions. Over a few days, Bestie gets to understand you and how you can think, and then can give you those suggestions that only a best friend can. Go team, Bestie and you. Did you know for a limited time you can get extra credit in your national progress file and special offers from all your favourite brands like McDonald's, Primark, PepsiCo, Mars and Uber if you get Bestie today? So don't miss out, all your friends are doing it. So notes for editors for the press release. Minister for the Cabinet Office, Matt Hancock MP, says behavioural science can help us all be more effective, hard-working citizens. By helping young people overcome their own biases and irrationality, we prepare them to be productive workers and part of a growing global economy. The Bestie Dream Team Advisory Board includes Education Secretary Nicky Morgan MP, techpreneur Rohan Silva, educationalist Toby Young, and best-selling Nobel Prize-winning economist Professor Danny Kahneman. So this is stupid, but the idea, this is basically the convergence of a lot of trends in design for behaviour change, which is that we monitor everything, we'll be able to monitor the way people think and optimise the way people think and make decisions for them. And some kind of convergence of the quantified self and kind of mass big data profiling will lead to a sort of personalised assistant that corrects defects in your everyday thinking. And also particularly because young people, I guess, are more malleable maybe for these kind of things. The idea of targeting it at them is something that actually quite a number of these projects are getting towards. So although this sounded stupid then, this is, I think, there are companies working on this kind of profiling in a way. So all right, you can tell I'm not very good at this, but what I'd like you to do, just for literally for 5 minutes, is to come up with a scenario yourself or in pairs or together that in some way is about behaviour change, right? That involves some kind of change in public behaviour or some kind of way of changing public behaviour as a sort of, perhaps for the next, I don't know, maybe 5 years in the future. So something quite relatively near future that's like almost extrapolating from trends that you see in the world around you right now. It could be about anything in your work or what you're interested in, or it could be taking something you've done already and kind of almost looking at it from a sort of behaviour point of view. Is that okay? So just for 5 minutes, and then we'll discuss it. I know we've got to finish, but I will show you. There's lots of examples of things where the affordances or the assumptions that are designed into it are not respected in a way by people, right? Whatever's assumed people are going to do with it is not necessarily what people do with it. There are some. I mean, some of them are quite. Some of them are quite funny, but there are expectations that are designed into things that people react against because they do not want to be constrained in the way that the system, the designers expect. And people will find ways around things. And I think that's, these are all worth worth considering. I mean, there are people, I mean, IDEO have said, many times that basic innovation is often just about perceiving affordances that others haven't, but that some people have perceived that others haven't. So, if you know that people use fire extinguishers as door stops, at what level do you look at the problem? Do you try and prevent people doing that, or do you try and design a way that the door can still enable fresh air or enable sound or whatever while still being safe in a fire? If you know that people are going to use things like that as an ashtray, is that actually quite a good thing because it's better than them being on the ground? That's an air vent from a car park, but from an underground car park, but it kind of affords being used as a litter bin. There are lots of these kinds of things, but these are actually quite useful from a design point of view. These are all this is for a parent doing it for a teenage driver, almost saying building in their own kind of limiting system. So I think you can look at these things as obviously designing what's possible with things and what's not possible, or what's preferred or what's suggested. People will often use things in different ways, and sometimes you can learn quite a lot from how they actually do them. So you could ask with any scenarios you generate, or any kind of possible future things, how will people misuse this? How will people find a way around it? How will people challenge it? How will people how people form workarounds in a way from your kind of thing? And I think there's a whole, I won't get into it now because of time, but there's a whole field of design in a way that looks at what people are trying to do and helps them do it better, rather than trying to persuade them to do something different. So this is obviously this is for trucks that are too high so they don't hit the railway bridge. In the UK we often have things that have a camera and a sign warning you of you'd be fined £10,000 for hitting the bridge. This was somewhere in the US, Georgia I think, where it's basically the cheapest solution was to put a sign that a truck that's too high will just hit the sign, because they know that drivers are not trying to hit the bridge. It's not like they're trying to persuade people not to hit the bridge. They're trying to make it so people don't hit the bridge. And I think this kind of subtle distinction I think is worth teasing out. There's one of the good examples of these things like barbecues. So in public parks in Britain, normally you're not allowed to have a barbecue in the park, and there's police and it's kind of not permitted. There are some countries where, Sweden for example, where they say, okay, people are going to want to have barbecues. It's better that we help them do it safely, and make fire pits so that the fire doesn't spread, and have lots of litter bins and have benches and things to make it easy to do the thing people are trying to do. So it's still behaviour change, but it's almost kind of guiding it towards something better, rather than trying to persuade people not to do it through threatening them or through.
So in the sense by those things that humans are going to do what they want to do anyway, the best you can do is hope that you can make it as safe as possible. Maybe, or you can work with what people are trying to do and perhaps get them to do something different, but that still meets what they were, meets a human need in a way. I mean, an example like Copenhagen, where so many people cycle, lots of people cycle eating, they're eating while cycling breakfast or whatever, they've got rubbish, they've got litter to get rid of. If you angle the bins alongside a cycle path, the trash cans, people, it's more likely to go in the bin. And it doesn't, it's not about trying to persuade people not to throw litter. It's about making it easier for them to do it in a way that doesn't cause problems. And I think there is a kind of field of that. But sorry, that went over a bit then. But but I guess I would just come back to this, that try to understand in the now, in a sense. If you can understand the context of current everyday life at present and how people make decisions about things and the context in which people live, then that is a much better start for any kind of futures that involve people's behaviour. Because if you can understand what people are trying to do now, you get a much better insight into what people perhaps will be like in the future. So thank you. That's it. Thanks. Cheers.